Hi everyone, I hope you're all well. In advance of the release of the Glebe Pants pattern, I thought I would film a little sew along with you guys, so maybe it's going to be a bit clearer than written instructions for some of you. Anyway, the first thing I wanted to talk about was fabric selection for the pants. So these are some Glebe pants that I made up before, and you can see that on my Instagram feed at Leela Sews. So these are a pure linen, and I would call it about a medium weight. They're completely opaque, so no transparency at all, but I would say they are lighter weight than, for example, the Blackbird Fabrics 7 ounce, I think it is. So they're definitely lighter weight than that. And these work really well. You can see that the linen has, you know, fairly typical kind of hand for linen. Like it is drapey, but it's got a little bit of crispness. I did iron these a couple of days ago, but they're still quite soft. The fabric that I'm going to use today, though, is a little bit different. So it's actually a suiting fabric, but I think it's a cotton. It's a bit of a mystery because I bought it at a pretty amazing store in Calgary when I was there for work. So don't know if you can see that, but I think it's a cotton blend. I'd say it's probably a cotton poly blend, maybe with a bit of viscose in it. So maybe a cotton viscose poly blend, cotton. Yeah, I think there's definitely some poly in there. Anyway, you can see it's got some drape to it, which I think is important. So when I grab it like this and kind of gather it together, I can see how it's going to hang with my finished pants, kind of. And so I think that's going to work quite well. If I were going to go with a heavier or a stiffer fabric than this, I would probably size up. So I'm going to go with my true size with this, just because even though it's a little bit thicker, it is got quite a soft hand and it's got quite a lot of drape. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut my pattern pieces out now. I just wanted to add here that, well, first of all, you can see that I'm not using the same pattern pieces you'll be using. This is my original pattern that I'm cutting from. But the way I've folded it is that I've only folded the fabric the width of my pattern piece. And then I have this bit over here that's single, and I've left that so that I can cut out the waistband very easily and also have kind of decent sized scraps rather than a whole lot more, you know, holder pieces, scraps with lots of holes in it. So I prefer to do that. I'll probably actually go ahead and actually make that fold even smaller just to squeak it out of as narrow a piece of fabric as I can, in case I want to make something like, I don't know, like a bag or something with my scraps, and I've got decent sized scraps. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've cut out my pattern pieces, and I've also cut some 1-inch wide strips of fusible interfacing. I personally really like this particular interfacing. I use it for everything. I know in Australia, it's the lighter weight one. It's called Whisper Weft is how I remember it being called. I'm not sure what they call it here in Canada, but I just go by what it looks like. It's kind of an interesting, it's like a mixture between a knit and a woven. But what I like is it really doesn't add too much body to your fabric, just enough stability. So the reason I cut these is, you can see here, this is the front pattern piece, front pants. And there's this slash pocket edge, and that is a diagonal, so it's actually a bias cut piece. And so what that means is that it can stretch out really easily. And we don't want to have like saggy pockets. Slash pockets do tend to sag a little bit just anyway, that's kind of their nature, but we want to try and, you know, eliminate that as much as we possibly can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fuse this interfacing on that slash edge, and so some of it will be in the seam allowance and some of it will actually be extend into the garment a little bit, I just find that it does help that sagging. If I were using a really transparent or lightweight fabric where I would think that the interfacing might show through, I could use a piece of cotton tape instead and just sew that on as I'm sewing the pocket bag to the front piece, and then catch that when I top stitch and understitch as well. That would help if it was more transparent, but this is a pretty foolproof way of doing it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. The other thing is this particular fabric doesn't appear to have a right and a wrong side, but sometimes that happens. You don't think it has a right and a wrong side, and then you don't pay any attention to it and sew it up and realize that there actually is a slight difference. So I'm just gonna try and keep it consistent. So because I cut on the fold, I'm just gonna kind of call the inside the right sides and this outside the wrong side, just to keep it consistent. So I'm gonna go ahead and fuse now. So now I just wanna go ahead and explain just how the pocket construction works. It's pretty typical for a slash pocket, but if you're not familiar with it, maybe this will help. So here I have my front piece with the fusing behind, and then I have my 2 pocket pieces. So this piece with the slash edge is going to attach here along this slash edge, and then this part here will go behind. So that'll make up the total front. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is take this piece of the pocket, which has got that slash edge, and match it to the slash edge on the front piece. So you can pin if you like. Not really much of a pinner myself, but I will pin just to show you where to sew.
So, pinning.
This slash edge, you can see that my pocket piece is already stretched out a little bit, so I'm just going to kind of pat it down, so maybe it's good that I'm pinning along that edge. I'm going to sew that on with a 1/2 inch seam. So I'll do that in just a sec. I'm going to pin the other side. Okay, so I'm going to sew that pocket slash edge. So I have my stitch length at 2.5, and so for all of my kind of construction stitches, I like to sew it at 2.5 stitch length. For anything that's visible, like top stitching or the hem on these pants, because I want it to be visible, I'll do it at a stitch length of 3. So here we go. I'm going to sew the slash edge first. So I've got a seam allowance of 1/2 inch here. So you can see that that's caught some of that interfacing, but some of it's still going to be on the body of the fabric. I'm going to understitch now. So what that means is I'm going to bring that seam allowance, all the seam allowances towards the pocket piece. So I'm not going to press, there's no need to press, but I'm just going to make sure that all my seam allowances are on this pocket side. I'm going to sew just a pin width away. Okay, so that understitching just holds it really nicely. Now I'm going to top stitch. If I were a good person, I would probably press this. In fact, I might go ahead and do that. So I'm now going to go ahead and top stitch this slash edge. So this is the front pant. I'm now on the right side of the pant. I'm not going to bother to back tack because it's not a structural thing, and these ends will be caught in the side seam and the waistband anyway. So I don't know if you can see that, but the reason we increase that stitch length for the top stitching is because top stitching is decorative, and so we actually want to be able to see each individual stitch, whereas when we're sewing you know, a structural seam, like something that's holding the garment together, the strength is more important, so we sew that at a smaller stitch length. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side now. Okay, so here we have the back side of the front pant piece with this is that pocket bag here, and then other pocket piece. So you'll see that there's a curve on this edge here, so we're going to match that curve with the curve on this piece. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to sew around this piece here to sew these two pocket edges together, and then I'm going to overlock them. I'm just going to pin. And I'm going to sew it. So this pocket seam is one of only two seams in this pattern that isn't a 1/2 inch seam. It's actually a 1 centimeter seam. And I am really sorry for switching back and forth between metric and imperial. The problem is that I learnt to pattern make and sew in metric, but now I live in Canada and things are kind of half-half. So anyway, 1 centimeter is pretty close to 3/8 of an inch, but I always think of it as a 1 centimeter seam. I am going to back tack on this seam. Okay, and I'm going to overlock that edge too. Okay, so now we have that front piece on the back side of it. You can see our pocket is sewn, pocket bag, and I've overlocked it. So there's actually a right and a wrong side for overlocking. You might not care. It was just kind of like drilled into me at college that there is a right and wrong side. So the one that is faces up as you sew is the right side. So I always try and make it like that, but sometimes it's just more convenient not to. So that's what that is. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay it out flat on the table because I want to stay stitch this edge together. So see how there's three kind of fairly loose layers here? I want to make sure that when I stitch it into the waistband and also with the side seam that it's going to sit correctly. So what I do is there's a notch here, so you can match that notch with the edge of the pocket piece and just make sure everything's flat. So if you've been a little bit off with your sewing or something, it might not exactly match that notch. It's not really a big deal. Just make sure that it's sitting nice and flat. And then I'm just gonna pin this edge too. This is a place where I always do pin. Okay, so we're just gonna stay stitch along this edge here, very close, just to baste it together. And then the same thing on this bottom. We want this pocket assembly to be totally flat. So again, oops, where's my notch gone? There should be a little notch. I did cut one, but seems to have frayed a little bit. So there should be a notch here, but there's not, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm just gonna make everything sit really, really flat like that. Line it up and pin this bottom seam here, like this. And here again, and I'm just gonna do a third pin actually. Just making sure that all of these three edges are in line with each other, because if they're not, and I don't catch them all when I sew that side seam, there's gonna be a hole. We don't want that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and stay stitch that I'll do it just like a 1/4 of an inch in from the edge. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've actually taken the waistband piece and I have sewn the short edges together with a 1/2 inch seam and pressed it open. What I like to do is do as many steps on the one machine as I can before moving to another machine. So I like to do as many steps on my straight sewer, so I just use a domestic, so my domestic machine, before I move on to the overlocker. So sometimes it might seem like things are a little bit funny, like why am I sewing the waistband now when I don't even have like a pair of pants? But that's because I need to overlock one edge of the waistband and I'm gonna hop on the overlocker now, so it makes sense for me to do that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the second waistband finish because this is the one that I think probably requires a little bit more explanation. So I'm gonna go ahead and overlock one long edge of this waistband and I'm gonna overlock the side seams and the inseams of the pant legs, not the crotch seam and not the hem and not the top edge. So just the side seams, inseams, and one edge of the waistband. I do that separately. So I'm just gonna do each piece separately. Oh, and when you do that, just try not to cut off too much fabric. So I try to just go right along that very edge. So you'll probably notice I keep laying the pants out like side by side, and that's just so to make sure that I'm never making 2 right legs or 2 left legs. Anyway, so now what I'm gonna do is put right sides together of the pant legs and sew up the side seam and the inseam. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. So I've got my right side here and the right side of my back piece. I'm gonna sew down this side seam and then the inseam down the inside of the pant leg, and that's both with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so now I have a left and a right leg, which is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn one of the legs the right way out. So one's going to be inside out and one is going to be the right way. I've gone ahead and I've also pressed all my seams open. So I highly recommend you press as you go with any sewing project. And I know it's kind of a pain, but it makes all the difference in the world. It makes the biggest difference between something looking like homemade in like not a good way and looking handmade and really high quality. So I would just say please go ahead and do that. So anyway, here's this leg is the one that is the inside out, and then my other leg is the one that's the right way out. So I'm going to put the one that is right side out inside the one that's the other way, if that makes sense. You know when I said to not overlock either the crotch edges? Of course, I did that because I was not thinking and just picked up the piece of fabric and didn't really look at what I was doing, and then I realized halfway through the overlocking that I was actually overlocking the crotch edge, and by then I couldn't be bothered taking it out. So anyway, one of my edges is overlocked, but it didn't really cut any off, so it shouldn't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and match the inseams here. Kind of a stickler when it comes to matching seams. I shouldn't be so stupid and perfectionist, but I am. So I like to stick a pin through the seam there, make sure it's coming out exactly in the middle there, and it's not, so I'm just going to move it. That's probably pretty good. And then I'm just going to go ahead and pin this crotch curve. So
the top edge. Actually, I didn't cut the notches on mine, but hopefully you did. So there's some notches for matching the crotch up. You know yourself, notches are there to be helpful. Anyway, I didn't cut them, but I should have. But because I'm not, let's put an extra pin there, that's fine. Let me go ahead and keep pinning. The fabric's pretty free, yeah? So, can't be delicate with it, but hopefully it works.
Okay, so I've got this all pinned. I'm gonna sew this crotch seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I'm gonna actually sew a second row of stitching really close to it, like 1/8 of an inch away, just as just for safety, because no one wants a burst crotch seam, and especially with a fabric like this where it's pretty fraying. Like I want to just ensure, I mean I'm going to overlock it as well, but I just want to ensure that it's not going to come open at a bad time. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and sew this crotch seam.
Apologies for keeping bumping the camera. It's very hard to position it so that I can sew as well. So it's so frayed down here. Just making sure that seam's staying open underneath there, because I don't want to sew it shut. Do a double check. Open. Some of you are probably cringing because I just sew with my pins, but that's how I do it. Very occasionally it results in a bit pin. But it's not too bad. I really hate unpicking, so I try to do things right the first time. Which wasn't obviously the case when I overlocked that edge. Oops.
Okay, and take those pins out, and I'm going to do my second row of stitching. Do I dare check my crotch seam matching? Oh my god. Let's see. Oops, one more pin. But you know what? Can I really be bothered to unpick it if it's not good? I don't know. I feel like I should do this off camera first. Oh my god, it's perfect. Perfect. Thank goodness, I don't have to do it again. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna actually turn the camera off for this, but I'm gonna, no, I'll zoom you in a little bit. I'm just gonna go about 1/8 of an inch, so just about, yeah, just 1/2 centimeter in the seam allowance from the last row of stitching. That's where I'm going to sew my safety row. Okay, so this is my trusty ancient brother overlocker. This came with me from Australia, and it is 24 years old now, and it has served me pretty well. So it's even using a voltage converter, because it's 240 volts in Australia, and we're 110 or whatever it is, 120. I don't even know what it is here in Canada. It's like 110 or 120, same as the US, and so it doesn't work. So I am going to overlock this crotch seam together. So let's go.
I don't mind if I trim a little bit off in the crotch, because I don't mind. So I kind of mind less about that also. The important thing here for me is like all this fraying, like I want to make sure that I do get rid of all of that. Really careful to not catch things under the bottom, because you don't want like a hole in your pants, that would suck. So overlock wasn't used for quite a lot of years, and I feel like it's actually gotten better. It's like worked its way in again. Probably needs a service, but oh well.
There we go. Okay, I'm gonna go press my crotch seam. This time I will press it, I'll just select a side and press it to the side, and then we'll do the waistband. Okay, so now we have something that really looks a lot like a pair of pants, which is pretty cool. I'm gonna show you, as I said, I'm gonna show you the second method of applying the waistband, because this might be the one that you're not familiar with. So I've got my seam here that I made in my waistband, and then this is the finished edge. So I'm going to go ahead and match this seam in the waistband with the center back seam. So right sides together, and I'm going to pin the waistband on. Oh look, here's a casualty of being sewn over. So I'm just gonna, go ahead and pin this waistband on.
If all has gone well with me doing accurate seam allowances the whole way around, then it should fit. If not, I might have to modify that a little bit on my waistband, not a big deal. I might have to ease it just a little bit, but I don't want to ease it too much. I'm going to just pin kind of carefully around that pocket edge a little, make sure it's not like flipped up or anything weird. I decided not to include a waistband pattern piece in the pattern because I wanted to save paper for you since it's just a straight piece. But the waistband piece that I actually did make had handy notches in it for matching everything, like your seams and everything, but I'm sure you'll be able to figure out how to just ease that in as needed.
Oops, and look, my fabric has stretched a little bit, so I'm gonna have to ease that in a bit, but that's not a problem. So you can see that my waistband's a little bit too short. It's not a big deal. So I'm just gonna go back and just add ever so slightly a bit of ease in as I go back and pin and distribute that ease through the garment. Part of that is because the waistband is cut on, I guess the weft, I always get them confused. The cross grain anyway, or the long grain, and the other one is the cross grain on this particular fabric. It's just kind of stretchy, so that's where we're at. But it's not really a big deal with these particular pants because they have an elastic waistband. And I think just with time and experience, you learn how much you can manipulate the fabric to make it do what you want. So yeah, so I could tell, like you can see, I've almost actually taken all that ease now, and I'm not even all the way around. So that's gonna be fine. I'm gonna put one more pin here, and then I'm gonna sew that on. So here we go, I'm sewing the waistband on. I forgot to say, this waistband is sewn on with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. That is to have a little bit less bulk in the waistband, and we don't really need a huge seam allowance there. So just make sure that you're matching your edges as accurately as you can so that you're not going to have holes. Okay, so here we are at my ironing board. It's kind of hard to see. So this here is the waistband, and this is the like pant part. Oops, every time I move this, the camera moves. My apologies. Just want to demonstrate what I'm going to do. So this is the inside of the garment. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and I'm going to press all of that seam allowance up towards the waistband. Make sure that's a really nice press. Okay, I'm going to do that all the way around. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I've actually measured this piece of elastic to be the correct size for my waist. I'm actually going to lay it on top of here. So the edge of the elastic is just like a pin width this side to the waistband side of that stitching line. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this waistband over it like that. Okay, so I'll make sure that's lined up all the way along. I'm going to press it in like this. To be honest, I don't always do this pressing step of pressing the fold in. Mostly I just do it by eye. But if you haven't done this technique before, then you probably, I would say, will want to go ahead and press that in, but it's not 100% necessary. So this is one of those areas where there's quite a few layers of fabric. This is where the pocket is on the front there. And just to reduce some of this bulk, I'm just going to go in and cut down some of that. That's not going to work. I'm going to use a different pair of scissors. So if I had really nice those applique scissors, those duckbill scissors, that would probably be a really nice thing to use, but I don't have any, so I'm making do with what I've got. So you don't have to grade. In fact, I would recommend not grading all the way back down to the stitching line, especially on this fabric, it's frayed so easily. You just basically want to make it so that so all the edges aren't on top of each other. And I could even go in again and just take some of those edges down so that each layer of fabric, it's like a set of steps or stairs, if you know what I mean. Anyway, that's what you're going to do. And I'm going to do that a little bit on the other side just because, you know, we don't want bulky. Bulky is not our friend. So here we go. Oh, look how badly that's fraying. It's like brittle. Okay, so now I think we're ready to do the next step. So I've got my elastic that I measured around my waist. I've decided I'm not going to top stitch this one in this thicker fabric. I think it'll actually look nicer if it's not top stitched. So I kind of went ahead and measured that pretty like firm, but not like crazy tight. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to overlap this elastic to the amount that I measured it and sew that together into it and make it into a loop. I've just overlapped it and I'm just gonna sew like a box basically. And I usually do a diagonal as well. I don't know why I'm so paranoid about it coming unstitched because I don't think it will, but I usually just do that for safekeeping, and I did a quick back stitch. Okay. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I have made that into a loop, and I've put the zipper foot on. I'm gonna zoom you in a little bit here. Zipper foot on with the needle at the right hand position. So I'm gonna place the elastic over the top. As I showed you before, I actually didn't press it in because that's not my preference. But I'm gonna place that elastic where it is here, just above that stitching line, and fold this down. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to flip it over. So I'm sewing from the right side. So my goal is to, so I'll just put one pin so you can see. My goal is to stitch in the ditch here, okay, which will be just a little bit above the edge here. And I don't know if you can see that. Here we go. Let's pin it better. There we go. So it's going to come up just about here. I don't want to catch the edge of my elastic. Like, I want to form a casing as I do this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew, stitch in the ditch with the edge of my zipper foot up against the edge of the elastic. So this is all of the elastic. All my seam allowances are tucked up into the waistband. And so I'm just gonna kind of, as I go, just adjust it and tuck it in there.
It's a little bit tricky, but I really like the finish it gives. And also, I really hate threading things through casings. So I can you get a kind of feel for where it's going to sit. So I'm kind of feeling here where the edge is. I'm still using a 2.5 centimeter stitch length because this is a structural seam. Okay, so I'm kind of rolling that waistband down
as I go. And the zipper foot will kind of ensure that you don't run over your elastic, pretty much. So I've gone ahead and I have measured the hem on this, and I've done a double fold. So I've folded it actually twice over. So there's a clean edge here. I'm really short in the leg though, so I actually had to take it up 3 inches. So I actually did a 1 inch and then a 2 inch. So people who have normal length legs probably won't have to do that. If you don't have enough space to do the double fold like I have, then you can just overlock that edge and then press it up. I've pressed it up and now I'm going to sew it. I've moved my stitch length to 3. Even though this is a suiting fabric and it's a little bit more of a formal fabric, just because the design is a fairly casual design, I like the look of actually a visible like machined hem on this. But you do what you want. You know, obviously, you know, a hand sewn hem is lovely too. What I usually do is I pick, because sometimes I'm not totally precise with my measuring of my hem, I pick a point on the machine that I can just eyeball so that my hem is the same width all the way around. So I'm just kind of eyeballing from this hole in my machine so I can kind of see whereabouts I'm going to be. I'm starting on the inseam of the pants, and that is just because I don't want to see the back tacking on the outside of my leg. Final step, if you like, is to add a label. This is a lovely one from Kylie and the Machine. I'm looking forward to getting my ones from the collaboration between Fabric Drop and Kylie and the Machine. The body positive ones, but this is a nice affirmation. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew that just underneath that waistband. So I'm going to sew the bar tacks now. I think it's really important to sew one down here where that pocket edge is. See how that's a really weak spot there? We don't want that to tear here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bar tack just above it. And I'm going to do it, I guess, perpendicular to the top stitching. What I like to do is actually use a bead of the of a buttonhole. So my machine doesn't have a bar tack stitch, but I know some do. So the other advantage of this bar tack is it actually helps hold your stuff in. So like if you, I don't know, if you carry coins around, it'll actually stop them from falling out. You can also do one at the top here as well if you like. So again, just a little bit down from top. Okay, so there are my Glebe pants all done. So I hope that this has helped you with your Glebe Pants sewing, and I can't wait to see your makes on Instagram, so please post them with the hashtag Glebe Pants. Thanks for watching. Bye.